Yeah, thank you very much for inviting us here. The COVID-19 pandemic has been unprecedented, historic, and disruptive. Having weathered the worst of the pandemic in the last 2 years, the Philippines, through the Department of Budget and Management, aims to sustain the momentum of the country's recovery from the impacts of the health crisis. Specifically, our department pursues this commitment to allocating public resources in the most beneficial and efficient ways. So my presentation here has three parts. The first will be a brief discussion on the Philippines' main fiscal stimulus in view of the COVID-19 pandemic. However, this presentation will focus more on the next two parts, which pertains to how the country intends to bounce back and move forward from the pandemic, while cognizant of sustaining inclusive and sustainable growth. Hence, I will be discussing the medium-term fiscal consolidation strategy and the budget reforms that we will be pursuing moving forward. The Philippines' rapid growth recovery is firming up as our economy grew by 7.8% in the first semester of 2022. This exceeds our full-year target of 6.5 to 7.5%, and also a marked improvement from the 5.7% recorded for the full year of 2021. You can see here in the graph that we really suffered sorely during the pandemic, experiencing a negative 16.9 growth, much worse than most of our neighboring countries here. For the second quarter of this year, however, the Philippine economy expanded by 7.4%, coming from 8.2% in the first quarter. This places the country's growth among the highest in the major emerging economies in the ASEAN region. We're just next to Vietnam, which I think experienced 7.7 in the second quarter of this year. The Philippine labor market likewise continued to record positive gains as the unemployment rate fell to its lowest since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. The country's unemployment rate significantly decreased to 5.2% in July 2022 from 7.2% in the same period of last year. This is also the lowest unemployment rate for all July rounds of the labor force survey that we have since 2005. Similarly, the underemployment plunged to 13.8% from 21.0% in July 2021. This is equivalent to a 2.2 million fewer underemployed individuals. So we're trying our best to really, given the fact that we are already back in full-blown, the economy is open, and so we are trying to get more people to be part of our economy. Here, presented on the screen, is the fiscal impact of the COVID-19 pandemic to the Philippines. With the weaker economic growth because of the various restrictions and quarantines to prevent the spread of the virus, actual revenue collections were seen to be subdued, with an average of 15.5% of GDP from 2020 to 2022, against the 16.1% of GDP in 2019. In response to the COVID-19 emergency and to support the country's economic recovery, the government aggressively increased spending to as high as 24.1% of GDP in 2021, vis-a-vis the 19.5% of GDP pre-pandemic level. Hence, this raised the deficit to GDP ratio from 3.4% of GDP in 2019 to as high as 8.6% of GDP in 2021. So we're now paying the price of getting these large deficit to GDP ratios. And you can see here part of the reason why we pick our expenditure to the GDP ratio during the pandemic is because of the fiscal stimulus. So we managed to get supplementary budget to provide for the programs related to COVID-19 measures. But likewise, we were lucky that during those days we had a lot of savings, and then we managed to do some kind of reallocation during those years so that most of this money would be oriented to those COVID-19 related measures. So the increase in spending is necessary to mitigate the adverse effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. So the national government spent 616.02 billion pesos, equivalent to 3.4% of GDP, for various programs as of end December 2021. This includes the 363 billion under Bayanihan 1, 195.6 billion under Bayanihan 2. Bayanihan is an old Tagalog word that we use whenever we have this thing of event, like you come together, people from the villages to help one another towards a certain goal, towards a certain cause. Okay? So we make use of these terms here. And here, there's also the 57.2 billion under regular funds composed of the fiscal year 2020 and 2021 General Appropriations Act, with 52.78 billion and 4.4 billion respectively. So the passage of Bayanihan 1 enabled the government to immediately respond to the COVID-19 pandemic by funding programs that strengthen the capacity of the health sector, protect vulnerable groups, and assist MSMEs and local government units. Meanwhile, the Bayanihan 2 allowed the government to continuously fund health programs, social protection programs, and cash for work programs, among others. The government was also able to fund COVID-19 vaccine procurement and indemnity fund, special risk allowance of health workers, cash aid, and the emergency repatriation program that was charged under the fiscal year of 2020 and 2021 general appropriations. The impact of the COVID-19 pandemic has been further aggravated by the consecutive hikes in fuel prices and consequent impact on the prices of other local goods and communities. This prompted the government to provide assistance to the most vulnerable household and other significantly affected sectors, including the agriculture and transport. So here in the slide, we have two programs. The first one is the targeted cash transfers, which allows a 500 peso monthly subsidy for 6 months to some 6 million beneficiaries. And these 6 million people are coming from the poorest 50% of our country's population. And as I think, as of the moment, we have already released some amount of money summing to 10.3 billion pesos. There's also the thing of the service contracting of public utility vehicles. No? It's an alternative public transportation industry business model being implemented by our Department of Transportation that intends to ensure the efficiency, safety, reliability, and financial viability of public transport services amidst the current health and economic crisis. So as of August 16, 2022, a total of 8.4 billion have been released for the program, of which 7.0 billion for 8,136 beneficiaries. Okay, so we do here something that we have not done in the recent past, which is providing cash transfers for people who have been, well, gripped by the rising food prices. Okay? Normally, we do this special funding only when there's a calamity. Okay? But we really, the government, I think, realized that this is like a calamity already. And we know for a fact that inflation affects everyone. But the thing there is that inflation is not affecting everyone in the same way. So we have to really pin down, okay, identify those people who were greatly affected by these rising prices by providing a targeted transfer. Okay. So here, we also do some kind of the fuel subsidy program, which aims to provide relief to public transport sector in order to cushion the impact of rising fuel prices. A fuel cash subsidy of up to 6,500 pesos was given to qualified taxi, tricycle, and full-time ride-hailing and delivery services drivers nationwide as identified and validated by our government agencies. Okay? So a total of 2.5 billion have been released for the said purpose. And as of August of this year, 291,650 beneficiaries have already received their subsidies ranging from 1,000 pesos to 6,500 pesos. Okay? It's not really a big amount of money. No? It's just, I think, a little less than the price of the COVID check that we had before coming here. No? So something like 70,000 Korean won. Okay? We have also fuel discount program, aims to provide fuel discounts to eligible farmers and fisher folks, okay? So this is actually for our farmers and fishermen, no? So it's not that they put fuel into our fish and rice, but they are highly dependent on the machineries, okay? And they are also sorely affected by this thing that happened in Ukraine and Russia, okay? Okay, so going now to the medium-term fiscal consolidation strategy. So to bounce back from the pandemic, the new administration crafted the 2022 to 2028 medium-term fiscal framework, the first forward-looking formal document that extends beyond the traditional 3-year horizon to reach 6 years, coinciding with our Philippine Development Plan. The MTFF, or this thing of medium-term fiscal framework, provides a set of measurable macroeconomic and fiscal targets which are subject to review and updating every 3 years. We call these targets, I know some of you would call yours rules or fiscal rules, okay? But it's true that this is the first time that we have submitted this to Congress, making it something very formal, although not legally binding. So our congressmen, our lawmakers would still not be bound to certain policies that they think are urgent. Okay, so these are still more on the skeletal framework that the administration has promised to provide to the people, no? And it's, I think, more of a accountability on the part of the administration to really fulfill these goals. Okay, so I think the last one there is, if you go back to that previous slide, is our dream is to be part or to be listed in that upper middle income status, okay, which we almost have done before the pandemic, no? But with the advent of the pandemic, we were put at a lower GNI, so we still have to revive that kind of dream of ours, okay? And hopefully before 2028, we would be able to reach that standing, okay? So the government's fiscal consolidation strategy, which supports the administration's socioeconomic development agenda, but is mindful of the risk of high debt levels on growth and sustainability, will be underpinned by increasing revenue effort through tax policy and tax administration reforms, as well as declining deficit trajectory over the medium term. Revenues are projected to reach 17.6% of GDP in 2028 from this year's 15.2% of GDP. Meanwhile, the deficit is expected to reach the pre-pandemic levels beginning 2027 at 3.2% of GDP before closing in at 3% of GDP by 2028. This is in contrast to the 8.6% of GDP actual deficit in 2021 and 7.6% of GDP program for this year. Okay, the next slide. So, despite fiscal consolidation, the declining deficit path, government disbursements will remain above 20.0% of GDP on the average over the entire plan period, averaging 20.5% until 2028. This is coupled with robust infrastructure spending projected to reach between 5% of GDP to 6% GDP for the next 6 years. Okay, so I'll skip these things because according to my stopwatch, I'm almost reaching my time limit. So let's anyway, these are just there in the booklet, so you could just go through them. So next one, please. Budget reforms. I'll just go directly to budget reforms. Budget reform remains to be our top priority. This will allow us to effectively and efficiently lead public expenditure management and ensure the equitable, prudent, transparent, and accountable allocation and use of public funds. So to ensure the effective implementation of programs, activities, and projects aimed at addressing socioeconomic gaps and accelerating economic recovery, the key to public financial management reforms are being pursued by the government, and these are the cash budgeting system, integrated financial management information system, or the IFMIS, and these two are under this, what we call the budget modernization bill, okay, which we are really trying to push in the current Congress. Okay, in the next slide, I just want to tell you why we are really trying to adopt this cash budgeting system. The thing here, the gist is simply to abandon the old ways, no, which is obligation-based system. In the olden times, we were allowing this contracting out of the projects and implementation of budgets for more than 1 year, okay? So this time, under cash budgeting system, we're limiting everything to just 1 year. So in other words, government agencies should be very mindful of the kind of projects that they are submitting to the budget department. These projects should be what we call implementation ready. So within 1 year, they should be able to finish or complete the project. And that's only the time that we will be able to include that in our general appropriations. So this gives a great push for these implementing agencies to do some kind of foresight or planning, and then before they just submit their budget to the Department of Budget and Management. As you can see in the next slide. Okay, so here's what happened in 2017. This is pre-pandemic times. So many of the agencies were able to contract projects and programs, 94.1%. That is what we call the obligation rate, contracted projects over the total appropriated projects. And compare it to the disbursement rate, which is the red line, which is the actual payment done by the implementing agencies over the contracted amount, okay? So as you can see, there's so much good intentions here, okay, but only very little implementation. So under the cash budgeting system, which we piloted in 2019, you see that the gap between the blue line and the red line is minimized, okay? So 91% obligated and 78.7% disbursed, okay? So although in 2020, it again widened simply because of the pandemic, okay, pandemic issues, okay? Next one. Okay, so I think in the succeeding slides, I'm already past my limit. It's already 17 minutes here. I think the stopwatch really helps, huh? So, but I just want to know to mention here is that the idea of digitalization. This is something that we are also pushing forward in the government to make sure that the processes are smooth and, of course, transparent, and to minimize human intervention. Something that we have to also check is this thing about corruption, okay? So we are mindful of these things, and that's why we are trying to right-size the government, so to say, no? So to make sure that there are only few people, there's no doubling of functions also in the future or overlapping of functions, and this will be achieved through our digitalization efforts. Okay, in the next slide, please. Okay, so this is what I was just saying. And then next one. Okay, so this is the budget modernization bill. So in a nutshell, I just want to say that we at the Department of Budget and Management are more on the receiving end. We are not the ones collecting revenues. We are not the ones really doing the financing or these things. So it's more on making good use of the resources that we have right now at hand, okay? So how do we make some kinds of, you can say, prioritizations of projects, programs? So I think it's where we could be of help more, okay? And of course, with the idea that making sure that every peso that we put in the projects and programs would really be put to use, no? And these programs and projects will soon be really realized and not just be put as program in our General Appropriations Act. Thank you very much. That's all, and thank you for your attention.